I used to think betrayal was something that happened to other people, the kind of drama you only read about in paperback novels. Never to women like me. My name is Linda. I'm 56 years old, and I've lived my whole life in a quiet town in Vermont, where the loudest thing on most mornings is the sound of wind through the pines. My husband, Richard, and I had been married for 30 years. We raised 2 children, shared a mortgage, a garden, and decades of quiet rituals that made up what I thought was love. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far stories like mine can travel. Maybe you'll recognize pieces of yourself in what I'm about to share. The day my marriage ended wasn't filled with shouting or slammed doors. It ended with silence. I came home from the library, my tote bag heavy with returned books, and my mind still humming from the smell of paper and old stories. The air in the house felt different, hollow somehow. His coffee mug was gone from the counter. His coat, the one he wore every winter for years, wasn't on the hook. The drawers in our bedroom were half empty. I remember standing there, not crying, not even breathing properly. Just looking. When you live decades beside someone, you imagine you'll sense when something's wrong, that some thread inside you will tug in warning, but there'd been no sign, no late-night fights or distance I could name. Just a growing quiet I thought came from age, not from absence. I called his phone once, twice, 5 times. It went straight to voicemail. By the 3rd day, whispers began, from neighbors, friends, even a coworker who looked at me with that kind of pity that hurts more than the truth. That's how I learned. Richard had left me for Megan, his secretary, a woman half my age, who had started at his firm the previous summer. People love to talk when something breaks. It makes them feel safe, like it couldn't happen to them. They whispered at the grocery store. They offered awkward comfort at church, and I nodded, pretending to be fine. But every time I opened a drawer or made coffee for one, I felt like I was slowly disappearing. For weeks, I lived like a ghost inside my own house. His shirts still hung in the closet because taking them down felt like finality. I couldn't bring myself to wash the pillowcase he'd last used. It still held the faint smell of his aftershave, that mix of cedar and something expensive I'd once loved. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a blanket over my knees, listening to the crickets and wondering how long betrayal echoes before it fades. There's a strange thing about heartbreak at this age. People assume you'll handle it better, that you're old enough to know how to survive loss. But grief doesn't care how many birthdays you've had. It hits just the same. The cruelest part wasn't losing him. It was losing the version of myself that had trusted so completely. I thought we were a team, 2 aging souls content to grow soft around the edges together. But when he left, I realized I'd built my peace around someone else's presence. And now that he was gone, the silence felt like punishment. I avoided social gatherings, stopped answering calls from friends who wanted updates. Shame has a way of isolating you, of making you believe your story is too messy to be spoken aloud. And yet, deep down, something small began to stir, the faintest pulse of defiance. Maybe it was survival instinct, maybe pride. I didn't know it then, but that flicker would one day save me. At the time, though, I was still deep in it, grieving a man who wasn't dead and mourning a future that no longer existed. But here's the thing about life. Just when you think the worst has already happened, it finds a way to surprise you again. Because months later, long after I'd stopped hoping to hear from either of them, the phone rang. And on the other end wasn't a friend or a wrong number. It was her, the woman who'd replaced me. And what she said that night would change everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and forgiveness. After Richard left, the house became my enemy. Every sound, the ticking clock, the creak of the floorboards, even the hum of the refrigerator, reminded me of what was missing. I'd wake up at 6:15 every morning, out of habit, still reaching across the bed for warmth that wasn't there. The sheets were cold, always cold. The first few weeks, I tried to hold on to the illusion of normalcy. I packed his lunches out of muscle memory, folded laundry that didn't exist, poured 2 cups of coffee, though only one was ever needed. There's a strange kind of madness that comes from routine. It gives you structure when your heart has none. At the library, my coworkers tiptoed around me. They spoke softly, avoided his name, filled my schedule with extra shifts so I wouldn't have to go home early. I appreciated it, though I never said so. Books became my sanctuary, a world where people's mistakes made sense, where endings had meaning. But real life isn't like that. Real life is the ache of walking into your own kitchen and feeling like a visitor. It's standing in the grocery aisle, reaching for his favorite cereal before remembering you're alone now. It's deleting his contact from your phone, then scrolling back just to see it again. I blamed myself in 1,000 quiet ways. Maybe I'd grown dull. Maybe the years had softened me too much. Maybe comfort had made me invisible. Women are taught to absorb blame like it's part of love. We take responsibility even for someone else's unhappiness. But time doesn't freeze even when your heart wants it to. Leaves turned. Snow came early that year. And with every season, the sting dulled just slightly. I started to notice small things again. How the morning light hit the window. How peaceful the house sounded when it rained. It wasn't healing, not yet. It was endurance. Then one evening, after closing the library, I came home to a voicemail blinking red. My stomach tightened. It had been months since Richard left, and I'd trained myself not to expect anything. But the voice on the machine wasn't his. It was a woman's, young, shaken, trembling. "Linda, this is Megan. I don't know who else to call. He's in the hospital. He asked for you." For a few seconds, I thought it was some cruel joke. My first instinct was to hang up, erase it, pretend it never happened. But something in her voice, the fear, the exhaustion, made me stop. I played the message again. And again. He asked for me. The man who walked away without looking back was now lying in some sterile hospital bed, asking for me. I sat there in the dark, clutching the edge of the table, my heart thudding in disbelief. Part of me wanted to stay angry. The other part, the softer one I thought had died, wanted to know why. That night, sleep didn't come. Just questions, sharp, endless, and heavy. By morning, I made my decision. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but because after years of being left in silence, I needed answers. So I put on my coat, grabbed my keys, and whispered to myself, "You're not going there for him. You're going there for you." And as the car engine started, I didn't realize it yet, but that drive to the hospital would not be an ending. It would be the beginning of something entirely different, something I never saw coming. By the time I reached a hospital, dawn was just starting to break, that gray, heavy kind of morning where everything looks washed in sorrow. I parked the car, sat still for a moment, and stared at my own reflection in the windshield. I barely recognized her. The woman looking back at me had deeper lines, tired eyes, and a silence that ran all the way down to her bones. For a long minute, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that I wasn't doing this out of weakness. I told myself it was closure. That was the word I used to make it sound noble. But if I was honest, curiosity had its claws in me. I wanted to see the man who had ruined me, to look him in the eyes and see what was left. When I stepped inside the hospital, the air smelled like disinfectant and something colder, that faint metallic scent of endings. I told the nurse his name, and she led me down a hallway that seemed too long, too quiet. And then, at the end of it, I saw her, Megan. She was sitting on a plastic chair outside his room, her head bowed, hands clasped tight. I'd imagined this woman 100 different ways. Smug, youthful, confident. The perfect contrast to my tired reflection. But the person sitting there wasn't the villain I built in my head. She looked small, fragile. Her hair was messy, her skin pale, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she stood, startled, guilt flickering across her face like a shadow she couldn't hide. "Linda," she said softly. Her voice trembled. I didn't know who else to call. He kept saying your name. He wanted to see you. I didn't respond right away. My mind was too full of everything I wanted to say. Every accusation, every ache I'd swallowed in silence. But the words wouldn't come. "What happened?" I finally asked. "Heart failure," she whispered. "It came on fast. They've stabilized him for now, but he's weak." She looked at me then, her eyes desperate and ashamed, as if she was silently asking for something I didn't owe her. Understanding, maybe, or forgiveness. "I thought you should know," she added. "He kept asking for you." I nodded, though I wasn't sure why. My heart wasn't beating faster, out of love or fear. It was something else. A strange, heavy mix of pity and disbelief. When I stepped into the room, the sound of the monitor was the first thing I heard. That steady, haunting beep that measured time between breaths. And there he was, Richard, the man who once seemed larger than life, the man whose absence had hollowed out my home, now looked impossibly small beneath the hospital sheets. His face was drawn, his skin ashen. There were tubes running from his arm, the kind of details that make you realize how fragile even the strongest men can become. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway. He turned his head slightly, his eyes searching. And when they found me, they filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Not love, not even remorse. Just recognition. The kind that comes too late. "Linda," he rasped. Barely more than a breath. "You came." I wanted to say something sharp, something that would pierce through his guilt. But all I managed was a quiet, "You asked for me." He tried to smile. It faltered. I didn't know who else to ask. That sentence landed harder than I expected, because underneath it was truth, the kind of truth you can't run from. When all the noise fades, when your health and pride and illusions fall away, you reach for the one person who once saw you for who you were. I sat down in the chair by his bed, the same way I used to when he'd come home late from work, and I'd wait pretending not to be worried. Only this time, the silence between us wasn't filled with hope. It was full of years, of everything said and unsaid. He spoke again, his voice weak. "I'm sorry, Linda. I really am. I thought I was chasing happiness. I thought his breath caught. I stopped him with a small shake of my head. Don't," I said. "Not now." There was nothing left to fix. A nurse came in, checked his pulse, and left quietly. Megan lingered outside the doorway, unsure whether she was welcome. And I sat there, not as his wife, not even as his betrayed lover, but as someone who'd finally seen the truth of him. A man, flawed and frightened. Not the god I once built my world around. When I finally left that room hours later, I didn't feel rage or sadness. I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I understood something. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he did. It was about letting go of what it did to me. As I stepped into the corridor, Megan caught my arm. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, tears in her eyes. I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked away. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Not because of him, but because of her. There'd been something in Megan's voice, something that didn't sound like guilt alone. It sounded like fear. And I didn't yet know it, but that fear would lead me back to her sooner than I ever imagined. The next day, I got a call. It was Megan again. Her voice was small, frayed around the edges. "I think you should come," she said. "It's bad this time." Something inside me resisted. Part of me wanted to say, "You're his family now. You take care of him." But another part, the part that still remembered the man who used to laugh beside me in the garden, the man who'd known my favorite songs, couldn't ignore it. So I went. When I arrived, the lights in his room were dim, the air humming with machines. Megan sat by the bedside, her hand gripping his. I stayed near the door, unsure where I fit in this strange triangle of grief. He looked worse, skin gray, breaths shallow. The rhythm of the monitor had changed, slower now, uneven. For a moment, the years between us fell away, and I saw the man I'd once loved, the same one who'd built a life with me, raised children with me, dreamed small-town dreams by my side. Megan stood up quietly and whispered, "I'll give you a moment." Then she slipped out of the room, leaving us alone. I moved closer, feeling a strange calm settle over me. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. He looked at me, his gaze clouded but steady. "Linda," he whispered, "you shouldn't have come." I let out a small, bitter laugh. "You asked for me, remember?" He smiled faintly. "Still stubborn," he murmured. "You always were." I didn't know whether to cry or curse him. "You broke me, Richard," I said quietly. "You really did." He nodded, barely able to move. "I know." His eyes filled, but no tears came. If I could undo it. I leaned forward. "But you can't," I said. "We both know that." The monitor beeped steadily, filling the silence that followed. I sat down, the weight of 3 decades pressing against my chest. And then something unexpected happened. He reached for my hand. His touch was weak, trembling. But for a fleeting second, I let him hold it. Not out of love, out of mercy. We sat like that, not speaking, until his breathing eased into a kind of stillness that only hospitals know. When the nurse came in a few minutes later, she looked at me and quietly shook her head. It was over. Megan came back in as they began to unhook the monitors. She froze, staring at him, then at me. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream. But when I saw the look on her face, pure, wordless devastation, I realized something that surprised me. She had lost him too. Not in the same way, not with the same years behind her, but the pain was real. We were 2 women, different generations, bound by the same man's mistakes. She sat down beside me, shoulders shaking, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, really looked at, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who stole my husband. I saw someone broken, confused, just trying to make sense of love the same way I once had. So I reached out and gently took her hand. We sat there in silence, 2 women who'd once been enemies, now connected by something neither of us had chosen. That night, as I drove home under the weight of that winter sky, I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It means you refuse to let the past own you any longer. And in that hospital room, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. The days after the funeral moved slowly, like wading through. I went through the motions, signed papers, made phone calls, thanked people for flowers I didn't remember ordering. People said the usual things. He's at peace now. Time heals. You were so strong to show up. But strength isn't what they think it is. It isn't poise or polite smiles. It's waking up when you don't want to. It's sitting through silence without drowning in it. When everyone left, the house fell quiet again. A silence so deep it almost had a sound. I stood in our living room, surrounded by decades of shared life that suddenly belonged to no one. I should have felt relief that it was finally over, that the man who'd betrayed me could no longer hurt me. But instead, I felt an ache I couldn't name. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the version of me that had once believed in forever. A week passed before I heard from Megan again. Her name flashed on my phone screen one morning while I was watering the plants. My first instinct was to ignore it. But something, curiosity, empathy, or maybe unfinished business, made me pick up. "Linda," she said softly, "I don't know if this is okay, but could we meet just once?" I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to say no, but there was something in her voice, a trembling sincerity I couldn't ignore. "Where?" I asked. She suggested a small cafe near the hospital, neutral ground. I agreed, though I didn't know why. Maybe I just wanted to see her one more time. Not as the woman who stole my husband, but as someone who'd shared in the wreckage of the same story. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window. She looked even younger up close, too young to have carried so much regret in her eyes. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down. I nodded. I wasn't sure I would. "I understand." For a few minutes, we just sat there in silence. Then she began to speak, halting at first, then faster, like she'd been holding it in for months. "I thought I loved him," she said. "He made me feel seen. He told me things about you, things I know now weren't fair, but I believed him. I thought he was unhappy, that I could give him something new. But he wasn't honest with either of us. He said he'd start over, but he never really did. He kept a photo of you in his wallet the whole time. I used to ask him to throw it away. He never could." Her voice broke on that last sentence, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long imagining her as my enemy that I hadn't considered the possibility that she was also a victim of his lies. Different kind, same pain. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said quietly. "And I don't hate you anymore, Megan. I just stopped needing to." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." I gave a small, tired smile. "Good, because it's not mine to give. We both lost something to him. That's what betrayal does. It breaks everyone it touches." She nodded, looking down. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I used to envy you. He talked about you all the time, even when he didn't mean to. The way you cooked, the way you laughed. I think part of him never really left you." That hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Because maybe she was right. Maybe love doesn't disappear. It just changes form, leaves traces, haunts places. We talked for over an hour about him, about what came after, about how easily people can mistake attention for affection. And as we spoke, something strange happened. The bitterness that had lived inside me for so long began to fade. Not all at once, but like frost melting under morning sun. When we finally stood to leave, Megan reached out and hugged me. I froze, then let her. It wasn't forgiveness, it was recognition. As I walked back to my car, the air felt lighter somehow. For the first time in years, I didn't feel defined by what had happened to me. I felt human again. Because the truth is, we weren't rivals. We were two women who believed in the same lie, that love could be rescued by sacrifice. And maybe, in our own broken way, we both learned what real freedom looks like. That night, as I sat on my porch, watching the stars come out, I realized something powerful. Sometimes healing doesn't come from revenge or closure. Sometimes it comes from simply choosing not to carry the weight anymore. But I didn't yet know that the next season of my life, the quiet one that followed, would become my greatest transformation yet. After the funeral, after the coffee with Megan, after all the noise settled into quiet again, that's when the real work began. Grief isn't loud, it's patient. It lingers long after the world moves on. And rebuilding isn't a single moment of strength. It's 1,000 small choices you make every day, each one whispering, "Keep going." The first thing I did was something simple. I cleared his side of the closet. For months, I'd left his clothes hanging there like a shrine to what was lost. That morning, I packed each one carefully, folded them into boxes, and drove them to a donation center. The woman who accepted them didn't know what they meant, but I did. It wasn't letting go of him. It was letting go of the story I'd been stuck inside. The house began to change after that. I painted the kitchen yellow, replaced the curtains, rearranged the furniture. Each act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away over the years. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to watch the sunrise, something I hadn't done since my 20s. At the library, people began to notice the difference. I laughed more. I volunteered to read to children on weekends. I even joined a local book club where, to my surprise, I made friends. Women my age who'd walked through their own storms and survived. We didn't talk about men much. We talked about beginnings. One of them, a painter named Carol, invited me to her studio one afternoon. "You should try it," she said. "You have the kind of eyes that see beauty where others see ruin." I laughed it off, but a week later, I found myself buying brushes and a canvas. The first time I touched paint to that blank white surface, something inside me stirred. Something I thought was gone forever. I painted without plan or perfection, just feeling. And when I stepped back, I realized the painting wasn't sad. It was vibrant, full of golds and blues and quiet light. That night, I hung it in my living room. My new beginning. Months passed. Seasons turned. The ache didn't disappear completely, but it softened into something manageable. A gentle scar where a wound once lived. Then one morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Dear Linda, thank you for meeting me that day. I've decided to move away, somewhere by the coast. I wanted you to have this." It was in his wallet. He carried it until the end. Folded inside was an old photograph. Me and Richard years ago, smiling in front of our first house. The edges were worn, the image faded. I held it for a long time, and for once, it didn't hurt. Because now I understood that photo wasn't a reminder of what I'd lost. It was proof that I'd once loved deeply, truly. And that kind of love, even when broken, leaves behind something beautiful, resilience. That evening, I sat by the window, a cup of tea in my hands, the golden light spilling across the floor. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. And for the first time, that didn't feel lonely. It felt free. Because peace, I've learned, doesn't arrive with someone's return. It arrives when you finally stop waiting for them to come back. The photograph stayed on my kitchen table for weeks, untouched but not forgotten. Every time I walked past it, I felt a quiet pulse of memory, not pain. It was strange how something that once symbolized betrayal could now feel like a token of peace. I didn't need to frame it or hide it. I just let it exist, like a page from an old book I'd already finished reading. But life, as I was learning, doesn't end with closure. It begins there. One Sunday morning, while cleaning out an old box from the attic, I found something unexpected, a sealed envelope tucked inside a stack of Richard's files. It was dated 3 weeks before his accident. The handwriting was unmistakable. His. For a long time, I just stared at it, the air heavy around me. My fingers hesitated to open it. What could it possibly say? Another apology? Another explanation I didn't ask for? I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and finally tore it open. Inside was a single page, folded twice. It said, "Linda, if you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to say these words out loud. Maybe I ran out of time. Maybe I ran out of chances. I've made mistakes, ones that cost me everything good in my life. I thought I wanted freedom, but I realize now, all I wanted was to feel alive again. The irony is, I only ever truly felt alive with you. I saw you once, at the grocery store, a few months ago. You were laughing with someone the way you used to. I wanted to walk up to you, to say something, but I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something. You were okay. You were moving forward. And I was still standing in the wreckage I built. I don't want you to remember me as the man who broke you. I hope you remember the years before that. When we danced in the kitchen. When we built a life out of nothing. When love still felt easy. Take care of yourself, Linda. You deserve peace. The kind I couldn't give you. Richard. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling. Not because the words reopened old wounds, but because they finally let them close. He hadn't written to justify what he'd done. He'd written to let go, and in doing so, he'd given me permission to do the same. For a long while, I just sat there, staring out the window at the garden. The morning sun glowed over the yellow roses I'd planted months ago. I remembered how barren that patch of soil used to look. Now it was full of color, life, and quiet beauty. It struck me then. Healing doesn't erase the past. It simply grows over it, like those roses over the old dirt. You still know what's underneath, but it no longer defines what blooms above. That night, I wrote a letter too, not to send, just to write. Richard, I forgive you. Not because you asked me to, but because I can't carry this weight anymore. You were a chapter in my story, not the whole book. I used to think your betrayal destroyed me, but it didn't. It reshaped me. It forced me to rebuild from ashes and discover who I was without you. And you know what? I like her. The woman who wakes up early, who paints, who laughs again. She's strong in a way she never was before, not because of you, but despite you. I hope, wherever you are, you found peace too, because now, so have I. I folded it neatly and placed it in the same box where his letter had been. A full circle, closed not by confrontation, but by quiet acceptance. After that day, something inside me shifted permanently. I stopped measuring my life by what I had lost and started cherishing what I had gained. Wisdom, peace, and a deeper kind of love. The kind that doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. I began teaching painting classes at the community center, mostly to women rebuilding their own lives. Divorcees, widows, women who'd spent decades caring for others and forgotten how to care for themselves. The first thing I told them was this: we don't paint, to make something perfect. We paint to make sense of what's been broken. And as the brushes swept across canvases, as laughter and tears filled the small room, I realized that healing wasn't meant to be solitary. It was meant to be shared. One day, as class ended, a young woman lingered behind. She looked nervous, hesitant. Then she said softly, "I heard your story, the one about your husband. How did you ever find forgiveness?" I smiled gently. By understanding that forgiveness isn't saying it was okay, it's saying I'm done letting it hurt me. She nodded, eyes wet, and whispered, "I hope I can get there someday." "You will," I told her, one sunrise at a time. When she left, I turned off the lights, stood by the window, and looked out at the fading sky. The last streaks of pink and gold melted into blue. Soft, endless, forgiving. For years, I thought my story ended the day Richard walked out. But I was wrong. That was only the middle. The real ending, the real beginning, was learning to love my own company again. Because in the quiet, I discovered something I'd never truly known before. Peace doesn't arrive when life gets easier. It arrives when you stop needing answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's what grace really is. The gentle acceptance that some stories don't end in reunion, but in release. That night, I lit a candle on the porch, not for mourning, but for gratitude, for everything that broke me and for everything that taught me how to rise. The flame flickered softly in the breeze, steady and warm. And for the first time, I smiled, not because I had survived, but because I had finally learned to live. Thick fog.